So those are my comments.
I noticed the same thing. I got the feeling that, okay, it's our job now to talk about this, we're going to talk about it, then get on with our year. Ever since I ran for school board, I can tell you, I've heard about bullying and intimidation from all segments of society. And one of the reasons, as Mrs. Parker said, is we asked for this. I started asking questions back in February with the climate survey and the Healthy Kids survey, because those documents are full of comments. Just as the one, harassment or bullying among students is a problem, 57% of the staff says it's a problem in the junior highs. That's a huge number. It's a moderate or a severe problem. My question to all of you is, and if somebody has a real good answer, how are those surveys used as a guide to pinpoint in your school that there's a problem and look at it and try to come up with methods to resolve it? Because I think those surveys, there's tons of questions in there that have answers relating to intimidation, bullying, harassment for sure, of all levels, of all types. And that across the board, the staff feels it's a problem and our students feels it's a problem. And so those surveys, are they being used at your schools? I know several of you do say that you have committees that review those and use them, but I'd just be curious as how you do.
Well, I know, well, actually, in our conversation with our schools, we do use that information primarily in faculty meetings, staff meetings, so we can get the word out. But we hit that almost every month. It's almost like a regular agenda item. I mean, that was a huge agenda item today. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, you folks can run up here and speak for yourselves, but I would say on a pretty regular basis, we're addressing these at our regular meetings.
Thank you.
I'd like to add to that, as you mentioned the climate survey that has been added to the Healthy Kids survey. We are doing that again this year. This is one of the years that we're on, and on meaning there's an on and off year, but we've been doing that pretty consistently every year. Marlon Sumter is coming up to speed on how this is administered. We've had a meeting about that, but more importantly, it really addresses our board focus goal on safe school and school culture. And so I've mentioned it before, and I think Dr. Sarvis has as well, we're really building out that school climate survey. We're going to this year use that survey as it is through WestEd and also the Healthy Kids survey, and then with your guidance from the board and the board focus goal and our work, I think actually David was the lead at our management retreat on that particular board focus goal, developing the strategic plan. We will develop that more thoroughly so that our questions are very targeted in what we see going on. I mean, some of them will be very much the same, but there's a much more of a spotlight now through your board focus goal and what we're seeing in our schools to this issue.
Thank you. One thing I noticed, and I'll every principal, the participation rate in those surveys is very, very low. And so I would urge all of you to take an extra step to get your staffs to participate, your students to participate, because it's like 1/3 of the respondents. And I did notice in this last one that I reviewed, special ed wasn't even surveyed. And so at least it was, put it this way, there were no responses from any special ed staff. So I would like to make sure that if you are doing it again, that for some reason the special ed staffs get into that.
Okay. We'll certainly put that on our secondary principals council agenda and cover that as comprehensively as we can.
Mrs. Cordero?
I just wanted to say, because I think I was making some points about what I think we need to be doing better or more of, that I know that for all of us, probably, I can certainly speak for myself, that the events of the last month and a half have really heightened my awareness and my sort of sensitivity to this issue. I'm certain, and I trust that you guys all feel the same way. Oh. And so you've already been doing some really good work on the campuses. I think we are, at least for myself, I'm taking notice of where I think we need to do even more, just because it's been brought so dramatically and tragically to our attention. But I really want to, again, applaud this outline, because I think you've really touched on some of the key issues there. And so if you follow through with, which as I'm sure you will, with the process that you've started, I think it will, we have definitely have the potential to find some really positive solutions and make some serious improvements. So I just wanted to not suggest that we think you haven't been doing a great job already. I think we're just all really looking for how can we make it even better, given that we recognize that we need, there's this issue is much more serious than maybe even those of us who, deal with it all the time, are just sort of brought up short when we see the kind of month and a half that we've had recently. So thank you.
Well, we'll do some work on it, and then we'd like to come back a little bit later.
And
and
Is there a
give
code of silence that nobody else wants to say anything, or if you're all here, you're all spending at 9 o'clock at night, don't feel bashful. If there's something you want to add or comment on what you're doing and why you think it's important, if there's some aspect on your school that you, we have one public, okay, let me finish mine. If there's, we're going to have one public comment, and the rest of you figure out what it is that maybe is just such a hot button that you want to spell out to us.
Okay. Elena Marie?
Well, Elena's coming up. Let me also mention that we're planning more parent education on cyberbullying. I mean, that's very much at the forefront of all of this, and we think parents need to know a lot more as well.
And we also have training for administrators. We just haven't, on Safe Schools, that we just haven't had the date set yet that's exactly targeted at this part, the bullying.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all, and I commend all the good efforts going on. My name is Elena. I'm with Just Communities, and as I know, you all know, we're a resource to the school on all issues of bullying and harassment, whether they're based on sexual orientation and gender identity, race and ethnicity, disability, and other issues. I'm going to focus on my comments on issues of sexual orientation and gender identity tonight, given in light of recent events, but not because we think that they're any more important than other issues. We know that this targeting is devastating to students across the board. I want to begin by really extending my heartfelt thanks to Annette Cordero for speaking at, and Kate Parker for attending last night's vigil that honored the lives of the numerous young people who have taken their own lives in the month of September as a result of homophobic harassment and bullying. And I want to say that really sincerely, because I'm all too well aware that at other places in our region and across the nation, when we ask elected leaders and people associated with our public schools in particular to stand up on anything that relates to issues of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning people, they're all too often not there. And that silence has a devastating impact, and our reluctance to talk about the issues has the devastating impact. We've got our most recent surveys say that 9 out of 10 LGBTQ students experience harassment at their schools, many of that not just verbal taunts but physical assaults. And anecdotal evidence would suggest that that's true in our district as well. And then we have the suicide rates. I know it seems like the media is focusing on this so much right now, but we had a study come out in the 80s that said that suicide was the leading cause of death for LGBTQ youth. And now we've got recent data that says the suicide rate is 4 times higher for these students. So it's, I hope that actually the fact that we're seeing it in the media is a positive change, that we're willing to really have that conversation at a national level about what we need to do. So I really want to just say a couple of things. One, I want to echo Ms. Cordero's comments about focusing specifically on lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender issues. I know that that's hard in the public schools, and I think that what happens with such controversial issues is that we tend to then talk about bullying and harassment just in general, which is important to some degree. But I'd ask you to think about the message that it sends to LGBTQ youth when they never see people like them talked about in the public schools. Not even in an anti-bullying program are they talked about openly. And that sends the message that their lives are so lacking in value and so shameful that they can't even be talked about openly in a school. And that not only is devastating to students' self-esteem, but also really condones a lot of the ways that they're targeted. So having the courage to speak up about those issues openly that are really unique is really important. We also need to start early. We know that Lawrence King was a middle school student when he was killed by another student, and that 2 of the recent suicides were by young men who were only 13 years old. So finally, there's 3 things that research shows are the most important things that schools can do. The first one is having a gay-straight alliance.
30 seconds.
Thank you. One of the interesting things in the research about gay-straight alliances is that even if no one goes, students say they feel safer and there's a reported less hostile incidents, even if no one attends the club. And having supportive staff members, and that can be accomplished through professional development. Students report much safer school climates when they can talk to their teachers about these issues. And finally, having effective policies, which as I know is something that we have in place, but policies that specifically address issues of sexual orientation and gender identity. And we hope that we can be a resource to the district in moving forward on this. Thanks for all your efforts.
Thank you. Okay, code of silence is still on.
Well, Mr. Herron, before we move on, I'd like to acknowledge the role of our athletic directors. You know, we have a lot of coaches. We have 500 walk-on coaches in this district, and we leave it to our athletic directors to work directly with each of those coaches on these very issues, and they've had to deal with some difficult issues. Thank you.
Okay, I would just like to close on this question from the survey. To what extent does this school provide harassment or bullying prevention? In the high schools, 46% of the staff says not much or not at all. So I don't know where that comes from, but that was in the survey. So we may be thinking we are getting the message across, but somehow our staff may not believe it. So, you know, I think we need to make sure it happens. Thank you all very much. We really appreciate the time you spend with our students, and we appreciate that you're here tonight. Let's go on to F4, presentation on the Western Association of Schools and Colleges report for Santa Barbara High School.
Well, Dr. Caprito was not able to be at our last meeting. He's here tonight to present on the WASC results for Santa Barbara High School.
Oh, good evening. I'm going to go through the front page that I hope you all received, and then I certainly would take any questions, and I'm sure there are many. The term Santa Barbara received this year was a 3-year term, and I'll go into that in just a few minutes. Accommodations and recommendations. The visiting committee left us with 4 areas to address. They want us to look at the increasing accessibility to challenging, relevant, and coherent curriculum for underrepresented population, to analyze local and statewide assessments that translate into best practices for classroom instruction, employ best practice teaching strategies that engage students school-wide, and then increase our data and technology training in EduSoft. So I will go back to the term, and what I want to recognize with the WASC term is something that's pretty critical. It's not exciting to get a 3. It's obviously better to get a 6, but I want to recognize the group that was with us for the ability to really look at our school and really look at our document and our instructional staff and everything that we do that surrounds curriculum instruction, or the 5 critical areas, and really provide us with a 3. If you look at the primary purpose for this, the whole purpose of WASC is for ongoing improvement. And if we're not in a position to have ongoing improvement, giving us a 6-year accreditation serves us no useful purpose at all. So I think in that sense, it not only sends us a pretty clear message, but it gives us areas of consideration that we have to look towards. So I want to start, first I say the term, then I'll give you the recommendations. The one issue that I will go to that continually comes up at Santa Barbara High School has to do with student engagement in the classroom. We saw this when we had the audit by the county. We saw it when we had the WASC, and we see it when we do our classroom walkthroughs. So those are areas that we are working on considerably this year. That's a primary focus for all of our staff. In terms of the community involvement, I will share with you that we had great parents, great community support on our WASC teams, our focus groups. They all had a generous amount of parents involvement. And in addition to that, the groups that we have working with us today, including the site plan and ELAC, are all still providing us with a great deal of information. We will use this document in our plan in conjunction with our site council plan and move forward. That's basically where we are. The progress and challenges, pretty simple. We have PLCs in place, and I mentioned this earlier today when I spoke about the site plan. We had, in prior years, had some discussion about the need for PLCs. And when I arrived at Santa Barbara High School, we talked about the need for PLCs. And there was an option at that particular point in time for working in PLCs. It was because it stemmed from an MOU. We have continued the MOU process, but I will share with you this year, last year's vote, we only had 4 people who didn't think that the validity of the PLCs was worth exploring for the year. So that's a pretty significant change over a very short period of time in terms of understanding the need and necessity for PLCs. Also, the thing that's about PLCs is that in that past year, we had as administrators, we had no ability to go out and deal with the PLCs. We didn't have, it wasn't written in the MOU. In fact, it was written that they were going to be self-monitored. This year, the difference is that we are, as administrators, monitoring PLCs, and each of the 4 administrators has been assigned a particular core subject matter, and they go to the meetings or they receive the PL notes and meet directly with the department chair. So it's a more effective process and keep us more involved, and it provides the opportunity for the group, for the PLCs, by subject matter to provide us with logs that document attendance, the goals, the objectives, the norms, and the next steps. So it's a big, big change over a year. The site council has, and I can't say institutionalized because one of the outgrowths of the site council was to look at our DF list. I can't tell you, this is 33 or 34 years now, I lose track, but each of these years I've been asked to look at a DF list. And that's a lot of what we used to do, is just look at the DF list. We'd say, here it is, and then it would go away. We have a group now studying the DF list because we find out that there are different Ds and different Fs. If we're looking at kids who have straight A's, except for that one D that they got in a physics class, that might not be the student that we're trying to address. We're looking for multiple Fs. We're looking for profiles of students. And so in order to do this, it's going to take this longitudinal study that we're looking at throughout the next couple of years in our WASC goal, particularly goal 4. However, we do have the DF list being looked at, particularly with 2 populations. We're looking at those with our Latino population, who seem to have started it down. There's no trend. We have a first round that shows that they didn't perform as well as they did last year, and then also in both English language arts and math, and then also the students with disabilities. That's a population that we really need to address. And then lastly, our students that are identified as socioeconomically disadvantaged. Those populations started to go down. But I want to be cautious, because when you look at our Anglo population, you can see that over the course of the last 4 years, they really only improved like 4 points overall. And I don't think that's a healthy growth. So it's not just the one population. We have a school-wide issue that we have to address. And so just looking at the DF list and looking at our EL populations and specific subgroups who are not performing well is something that we're targeting over the next 3 to 4 years. We actually have a 6-year plan. Under the guidelines of WASC, they're going to come back for a 2-day visit, which I think is, again, healthy, and they'll be back in about a year and a half. Okay, that's really what it is. It's 2013 in the spring, but we have about that long to prepare for this document again, and we have a short period of time in which we need to do a lot of work in order to show some improvement. I'll share a couple of points before I move on, and one is that WASC was real clear with me when they left. I asked them, he wanted to know how honest our chair could be with me, and I want to be, I'm brutally honest. I have another team I have to chair this year in Pasadena, and they want honesty. That's what they want from us as chairs, or they want to hear from that. And I want the same thing from our chair. And he was real honest with me about where our strengths and weaknesses are, and they were very honest in the report back to us. Student engagement is the #1 issue that we have on that campus, and it all goes back to what are we trying to do. We sent a group out to look at our EL population toward the end of last school year. We had a countywide organization came out. They used our school. We found out that our population that needed to do the most talking was talking less than 2% of the time in the classroom over a 6-period time. That's just not good. And it's because they're doing what I'm doing. They're addressing you. And the people that do the most learning are the ones that are doing the most talking. And so we really need to get our kids speaking. And that was a real problem for us. The next issue that we have, we talked a little bit about connectivity and hardware with technology. We're one of the schools that is looking at going wireless, and it's all been funded, and we have our foundation to thank for that. However, those two pillars are just the structural pillars. We have stuff, that's what we have. We have stuff, and we will have good connectivity throughout the campus in a very short period of time, and it's working now. What we need to start addressing is digital content, because one of the things that, again, we need to address the WASC is the fact that our kids learn differently today than they learned 10 years ago. And the fact is we're still doing a lot of rote learning, and that's another place we have to turn a corner at Santa Barbara High School. And it's imperative that we do that and do it relatively soon, because we have kids that are really missing out on some quality education. And we have good teachers. Don't misunderstand me. We have very good teachers. We have teachers who need good training, and it's a given. There's a concerted effort by the high school to address the last issue, which is our goal 4. And it's an issue that I've been looking at. It's why I continue to tell you why I came to Santa Barbara High School. We have 2 high schools, and I think it's time that, it's high time that we really start targeting this. We have a focus group. I hope that's not me. We have a focus group out there that is looking at addressing the school-wide instruction that relates directly to this notion of equity in education. When we talk to our staff, they know there's a big difference with the kids. And we're trying to look at ways in equity. It's not just providing the same education, but expecting the same results. That's critical for me. So it's something that we really have to look at. I don't think that's me. I have a cell phone, but I don't think it's ringing. Sorry. Specifically, the school is going to look at factors that contribute to the disparity in academic achievement between students in different racial and class backgrounds, and the factors that are responsible for the racial separation within the school, both voluntary and the one that I think we have a tendency to follow a lot is sorting that's carried out by the school. And we do this when we do classes. We see it when we have clubs. We see it when we have sports. We see it everywhere. We're going to address why that is at our school. The challenges we have is pretty clear. Everybody has the same challenges, I think, that we do. It's funding. We're looking at getting adequate funding for staffing ratios, and I know that's a big challenge for everybody. I know that we've had a lot of discussion about it, but we really have to start looking at providing services for those students who need it the greatest, and that's really important for us. And that's a quick summary of the program, and I know there's probably lots of questions.
I'll
Mrs.
go
Deacon?
first. Thank you. Well, thank you for that. Of course, when we see a 3-year accreditation, that is cause for concern. And so I appreciate your frankness, and somebody's cell phone's ringing.
No, it can be a cell phone
just
anywhere in the
existence.
room
Oh,
or
is that right?
even
Okay.
in the next office.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So I appreciate your efforts to address those things with us tonight, and that's not to say the other schools didn't have areas that needed work as well. 3 questions. Student engagement in the classroom, I think, is really important, and I recently visited a junior high where the administrator classroom observations look precisely at that, and I'm wondering if you're implementing anything along those lines.
Last spring, probably around April, I started a walkthrough program where the staff, all the 4 of us, go out for an extra hour a week and walk through the classrooms with the sole purpose of looking for that. That's really what we're looking for. We can do a walkthrough, the 3-minute walkthrough, and it's all, I'm really interested in student engagement. Just tell me what the students are doing in that classroom. That's what I want to know. Are we standing up and lecturing, and then people are just writing with their heads down? Do the teachers even know we're in the classroom? I mean, we're really looking at a lot of things. And, I learned something even this morning that John Vecchio is doing at the junior high, and he's providing feedback on these walkthroughs, and that's something that we're going to do as well. We leave little notes in the boxes, and thank you for the visit, this is what I saw, but I think a global message to the staff about what we were able to see in these 4 hours, you can see a lot of classrooms in 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that's what we intend to do. So that's really what we're targeting, and the staff knows it.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
because I think that structured feedback on a consistent
Yeah.
basis across the classes is really important. One observation by the team really jumped out, and I'm sure my other board members have noted this as well, but it says the Santa Barbara High School staff does not feel the school board always supports the school's purpose and vision. How could we do a better job of doing that if in fact we're not doing that, or why is that perception there?
It's, I'll tell you what I found. There's a lot of mixed emotions on that high school campus over a host of things that have taken place long before I got there. In fact, the WAS committee was very clear with me in saying that the staff is unhappy about things that are out of your control. They were unhappy about things out of my control. And they stem from a former principal to no cafeteria. And how that relates to student learning is something of great concern for me. And it was of great concern for the WAS committee. They were very clear to share that with me. They're very honest. And these are things that just aren't in my control. They're outside of that, those two items, our staff really has almost no connection. There's not, I don't see anything else where there is a level of support. There was concerns over class size, and I think that working with the group last year as part of the negotiating team, working with the union, with Lane and the district administration, there was a good resolution to that in terms of creating a balance. Those were concerns, and I think that was an outgrowth of something that wasn't looked at when it was initially addressed, and that was part of the concern that they had. And I think that since then has been addressed. The one concern that I would say over and above that is, and again, I find it a little bit unique to this campus, is that moving towards standards-based education, moving towards common standards, aligned curriculum, and looking at changing from this is what I think kids should learn to accepting what kids should learn from the appropriate parties has been a difficult challenge for this high school. It's just been really difficult.
The item that goes along with that was the next sentence, Mrs. Deacon, which is, I'll just preface it, something I agree with, but I'm curious why your staff feels this way. The staff feels that a director of secondary education is needed to assist in communicating district expectations to site-level administrators. Do you have any idea why your staff feels that way, or?
Yeah, there were some changes, and I know when Paul Turnbull left, there was an expectation that position, would be filled, and I think we've had conversations about this as well. And there is an appreciable understanding about the job that looking at two administrators do and have responsibility for a district of this size. And so I keep going out on these limbs, so I'm gonna jump out again. It's difficult at best to do what you're asking two people to do with a school district this size. And I've been in a lot of school districts, and to not have a go-to person regularly, and we do, don't misunderstand, we can go to them for a lot of different things. But to not have a secondary person to go to in terms of standardizing some of the programs, not just at my school, but at the three schools, is a difficult thing at best. It's harder here, more difficult, simply because with three high schools and the demands of secondary education, I mean, they're truly their demands, is a lot to ask of the two people sitting directly to your left. It is a challenge.
Thank you. Other questions? Mrs. Parker?
I have so many sticky notes and highlights here that we could be here a really long time, so I'll try to narrow it down.
Okay.
First of all, I wanted to talk about this 3-year term. In the letter that you got, it doesn't say anything about a revisit time in between, so you are getting a revisit in a year and a half?
Yeah, we get it. No, it's a 3-year process, but for us, we have to start again in a year and a half because we have to have another document prepared, not to the degree that we had now, but we have to have what would be considered a 3-year report, and we have to show considerable progress within 3 years. And the difference in a 6R, which is not a revisit, but it's a midterm visit, is on a 6R when we go out for 3 years, we go for 1 day. And we visit the school site. On a 3-year term, they come out and they visit for 2 days. Okay, and then they decide at that point whether the school is making significant progress to move to award the additional 3 years. All schools are on a 3-year track, and they do what they can to get them back. So there's not much chance that we won't get a 3, but the fact that we got a 3 is a clear message that, you know, they want to look at us for ongoing improvement. So it's a 2-day visit.
Okay. Well, I guess in the bigger picture, with so many issues raised, I do wonder if perhaps some more outside involvement in this action plan process might be useful for Santa Barbara High, because it's a lot. And one of the things that I was thinking about, both in terms of our last agenda item and some of the issues when we're talking about, for example, administrators at a junior high getting into the classrooms, is that we know that staffing is low at our high schools. And I think that will affect how effective your process is if you're just doing it alone, too. So I'll throw that out there.
Can I just address that and tell you that this is not a single person process at this high school. We have designated one period for a person to oversee WASC for the next 3 years. We also have roles and responsibilities for every administrator, and our focus groups, our leadership team is still in place. So it's a pretty significant group of people that is working on this. It's an ongoing process. It's just.
But in terms of assistant principals or a principal going into a classroom and spending enough time in there to really process whether there's actual bell-to-bell student engagement,
Right.
because what I know happens is that sometimes you'll go in and guess what? They are teaching for the first 15 minutes of the class. It happens to be when you're in there for 5 minutes.
Right.
Turns out that the rest of the class period, they were reading a book or watching a movie. And so I think, especially if you don't have the staffing level in your admin team that the junior highs do, for example, that it puts you at a disadvantage for having the manpower to go in to these classrooms enough and for long enough to really see what's going on. I saw their comments, they're pulling out, sometimes they were talking about some teachers have a renewed sense of collaboration, and some standards-driven lessons are visible throughout the day, throughout varying subject areas along with the objective of the day. So it really speaks to a need, and they raise this again and again, the professional development and having a staff development calendar, and I know that that's on your action plan. One of the things that I just feel is so important, and we may have, this may be a good time to, is what you were addressing in terms of consistency across the district and curricular areas.
Right.
That was under your key issues on page 25, establish common district-wide curriculum in core academic areas. We're about to be rolling out the Common Core standards. I would really like, as a board, for us to be talking about, I think we should start with English Language Arts, because that is the key weakness in our district. But I think we have no expectation that the same thing is taught at our 3 high schools. And not just the curriculum is different, but expectations are all over the map. And I think that would be a real positive for us to be focusing on that at the board level, so that it's happening at the district level, where we are putting in place, as the Common Core is rolled out, hopefully starting next year, we have consistency at our 3 high schools. And I would start, you can't do it all instantaneously, but I would really start with English Language Arts, roll that out, and then start hitting the other subject areas. And let's see if there's anything else here. The one other piece that I think is critical, there are so many critical things, the vertical alignment between the junior highs and high schools, where particularly your core feeder is Santa Barbara Junior. So I would think that you and John Becchio, the APs and the teachers need to be spending time on each other's campuses. And so I would love to see that starting to happen. And I think that as this moves along, we just need to be getting regular updates about it. Because it's critical, obviously, that this school gets its accreditation extended in 3 years, certainly, but it'd be great to be making significant progress before the year and a half is up.
I agree.
Mrs. Cadero.
Well, I think probably all of us had a number of questions and concerns, and a lot of them have been touched on already, and I'm not sure that we could probably answer or address all of them here tonight anyways. But I was wondering, one of the concerns I found, or one of the things that I felt very concerned about was the lack of student engagement, and that the concern that, and you even identified that as being the #1 concern on the campus, is student engagement. And I wonder, in terms of getting the staff engaged, or getting especially the teaching staff, the teachers engaged, is there something happening now, is there something in place now that is coalescing the teachers, that you have sort of put in place so that everybody is on the same page about what the goal is?
Yeah, there are actually, a couple of things, and the primary thing that we were using is something that I think common across all the schools now. We're all using, Teach Like a Champion. And incorporated in that book are several really positive strategies. One of the things that we did is we took a couple of those chapters and created a rubric at the beginning of our school year with the staff, and that's, there's a lot of teachers. And we created a rubric under we selected certain educational strategies, and we had a focus on where we thought we were today and where we wanted to be by June, much like we do with anything else. But it was our rubric that we created. We took the BITSA titles, and we took some language from BITSA because it goes from innovative to beginning to innovative. And we outlined what a particular strategy might look like if we were in each of those stages. And then we pulled the groups together, and we created a single voice for those. And then we got together as a staff and said, okay, under this, here's where we want to be. So there are some strategies in place for that, and we do constant reminders about where are we, this is what we said, this is where we want to be. And then we did 2 other ones that I think were simple, but one of the things I noticed in the past, over the past time, and it's not just here, it's with other schools that I see, is that when you get into a classroom, how long does it take you to get started? So we chose 2 elements in one of the chapters that all of the staff agreed to work on globally. So at the beginning of each classroom, every student knows that something's going to happen in that classroom to get them moving. And it was something that we could get everybody to rally around, and they did choose that. We created rubrics for those and said, yeah, we're basically here and we want to get here, so what can we do? And there was some pretty good discussion about that, and it's carried over into our faculty. We have learning communities instead of faculty meetings, and we've had some pretty good dialogue over the last 2 months regarding this. So that really is what we have in place, and it's something that I think is easy to do and easy to monitor, because we can walk in and see if those kids are doing it. Now, as was said, it's really simple to go in the first 2 or 3 minutes and see people working, so what happens after that? So I think these walkthroughs are going to be healthy, because we're going to see people through different parts of the day. If we're out for an hour, we're not starting everybody's classroom. We're just going by and looking and moving to another one. So we'll see teachers in a variety of different places. And then we get together and talk about that. So that's proven helpful as well. Knowing that we're out there, I think, is something. And it also, it boils down to basics. I mean, this is what you said you were going to do. This is what you hired. This is what you signed up to do, was teach these kids. And the strategies have changed. And that's the other part of the mechanism we're looking at is, what are you doing for ongoing student learning? And how is that working in your classroom? So those are good discussions that we're having. We have those discussions monthly.
And then, so I appreciate that. I have some concerns about the extent to which that is being reflected in the teachers. I guess I'm interested in how to get teachers on board that inspires them to get on board. I guess I have some questions around that, and especially as you identify that aligning with with district-wide goals and standards, et cetera, is one of the, is an issue. You have here, implement consistently school-wide standards-based instructional strategies aligned to benchmark and lesson objectives. And so that seems to me as a, that's one of the key issues. To me, that seems a really basic aspect of making sure that, you know, appropriate instruction is taking place in the classroom. And so I guess where I'm trying to get to is where do we, how do you generate that, I don't know, esprit de corps maybe, among the faculty to embrace that as their own, and the promote greater faculty awareness of school-wide learning goals, especially diversity and tolerance, that are embedded within instruction. And I think that's a key part there, that are embedded within instruction. And so, yeah, I guess being a teacher myself, I feel like it's less effective to try to impose something on teachers. It's more effective to try to, get teachers to embrace it, but that's also usually harder. So I'm wondering, how we making that part happen.
The biggest, probably the single number one response I can give you is the work that they're doing in PLCs.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's new, it's new. Requiring them to do now what PLCs do, and monitoring that is a major step in making that happen. It isn't going to change overnight. That part I do know, and it's not frustrating. It's just part of the culture. The part about, and you discussed several things, but when you talk about alignment of curriculum, these are things that we can share that need to be done. Those are things that we can mandate. The implementation of those things, we have to go observe to see if that indeed is happening in the classrooms. So there's got to be additional monitoring. It's pretty clear we have to be out there a lot more than we are now. The other piece of that is working with your common groups. If you have a common core group in algebra, what are some of the best practices and how are they sharing that information? And it goes back to this whole notion of sharing data in a more comprehensive manner. It isn't just about how well my kids are doing. It's more about if they're not doing well, what do I do about it? So it's really self-generating, and it is not something that you can impose. You can't make anybody do these things because it just gets all sour.
Mm-hmm.
So between the PLCs and the common practices that they're starting to embrace, and I will share, this has not been an easy task at this high school. I'd be foolish if I could sit here and say, we'll have it done, or it could have been done by now. It's been a challenge. This is very difficult. But there's movement, and that's good news for us. And we also, in generating through the use of this book, and I don't want to say this is the godsend. I just want to say, and it's not all the answer, but it is something that has our staff communicating, and that's something that we weren't doing a year ago. We weren't doing that. And so when you have 40 or 50 people, we do this twice. We have late start Wednesdays, and we have 2 meetings because we have 0 period classes. So we have about half the group meeting at 7 and the other half meeting about 8, and it's what they've agreed to do. There's a lot of conversation, and it's healthy. It's so much different than it was before. It's having a conversation and starting to talk and having somebody stand up and say, we don't do these at this high school, which is what I got 3 years ago or 4 years ago. The dialogue is now, this is what I do in my classroom if I see this. And somebody else will add to that. So it's more about building upon what was said prior. Mm-hmm. And so I would offer that in the best sense of what we laugh about as being violent agreement, we're starting to agree on many things, which I think is healthy. That wasn't happening a couple of years ago. It just wasn't taking place.
Okay, thank you.
I just have 2 or 3 quick things, and I have discussed these with you in depth.
Right.
So I can use a short answer, but
Okay.
I'm not sure about the rest. But I'm just curious, what can we as a board do, or what can we administrative do? In here, it talks about Edusoft training, grade book areas, 60% of your staff use it. You've told me now it's closer to 80% possibly.
Yeah.
But that's an aspect of parent involvement having the availability for parents to get involved with their children. What do you think needs to be done on that?
Are you referring to Edusoft or Aries?
Well, it says Edustop, but also the grade book, areas.
Okay, those are
Two different things,
right.
but they both are spelled out in here as being lacking.
Yeah, the one thing about Edusoft is, I was so excited when I got here and realized that Wayne Cole was starting this process, and this was 4 years ago, and since then he's just gone crazy, and I've used this thing for years. It's one of the most powerful tools that is out there that we really need to start to enforce a little bit more. Now, we do this, again, with the PLCs, because now, with the PLCs, they're forced to look at data and really seriously look at it. Without the data, there's no sense in having the meeting, because everything that we do is data-driven. So more and more teachers are, in fact, since then, it is probably closer to 80% are using, Edusoft and scanning their own materials and doing the work. There are still people who are, technophobic, really. And you can't do damage to these things. You can't do it wrong, but they're still shy of getting in there with the computers and the technology. That just is more training. So what can be done? It's time. It's time. We had a discussion even today about when do we do the things that we're supposed to be doing? How do we get as much professional development out of this as we possibly can? And I think those are strategies that as a board we could look into together.
We need to do that.
Yeah, and the same thing, now the gradebook is, more and more people are using the gradebook, and our requirement is that if you're not on gradebook and a student comes and asks you for a grade report, it needs to be turned in now. You need to be able to do that today, because everybody else can log in and see exactly how their kid's doing. And if you're not using gradebook, if they don't have that same accessibility, it becomes a problem at this high school. And I think we're seeing some significant changes there as well.
In here, it said your counselor ratio is 430 to 1.
No, it's 409.
409, okay. It said your math for geometry and algebra is 22 to 1. Have you gotten your math and your algebra and geometry classes down into that 20 range?
They're down into the 20 range.
Okay.
Yeah.
The low 20 range?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
In the areas that we can, we still have new kids coming to school, so you're going to see some imbalances, but we all see some imbalances.
Okay.
But the greater effort to get them down is taking place, yes, has taken place.
The last thing has to do with this student engagement.
Mhm.
Last year, we put in place an attendance support program that the other high schools are using, and you're not. You're using your own program for truancy purposes. Last year, if you're going to teach kids and get student involvement, they need to be in their seats.
Right.
And you had 26,000 periods of truancy last year, which was double most any other high school. I know you're redoing that program this year, so I don't really want to know about last year, but what are you doing this year to get that 26,000 number down to some reasonable number?
Well, I don't know about the statistics, so I'll be frank.
Okay.
I don't know that was the number that was brought forward, and I have no place to
We had a report
debate.
on it here
Right.
at our meeting.
The one concern that we have is, and I'll be just as honest as I can, that program was being mismanaged last year. It just wasn't being managed well, because it demands that it is a 5-tiered system that requires us to intervene with parents and counselors. And through my own observations, and after I received that information, going back to the counselors and the administrators, they weren't having the parent conferences. So the program was not being implemented at all. We're too busy, no. So our focus this semester is targeted on that. It will work. And it's within a short period of time, it should work. Kids are not just being removed, but the series of interventions, we're meeting now a greater number of parents, so many parent meetings, and the goal isn't to drop. The greater goal is to get them in those classrooms and in the seats. The intervention piece that we have really speaks to what can we do for your kid if they don't want to be in school? What do we do for your son or daughter? And that's really what we're trying to focus on, is getting the parents involved and the kids involved to the point that they're finding out in a district like this that has 240 units, if you miss a class, your graduation has been pushed away by 1 semester. So it's critical that they're in their seats, and that's really what we're focusing on.
Yeah, I would hope so, because if you're going to have your own program, it better work.
I agree.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
It was a great report put together, and you've got a lot of work ahead of you.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Thank your staff for us. Okay, we will go to F5, and we have 22 minutes to finish the agenda. David Hetjunk.
Well,
Well, this fortunately is a brief item. We've talked about this a number of times. This has to do with measures Q and R and the kinds of projects that we would take on at the schools. Dave Hetjunk will explain a matrix that he has put together and worked with Eric Smith on.
Thank you, Dr. Sarvis. As requested from the board, we did develop a matrix plugging in projects off the list previously provided to the board with the priorities that were suggested to the board. Again, neither this total list nor these priorities have received board action. These are just suggestions, comments, and trying to anticipate what may happen in the future should measures Q and R be successful. As indicated in the cover memo, I did add one priority, protecting the asset. As I mentioned last time, you're protecting a building from the elements, whether it be from the roof or the walls or from water intrusion under the doors. It's important to protect what we have. And so I added that, took the leeway of adding it as a priority. The board can make comment on that. This was just my first stab at putting X's in things. I've been through it a couple times. I got a lot of little tweaks and changes. Just one thing for San Marcos High School, at the top of their list, it says ADA restrooms. That should say ADA and restrooms. We have some ADA work there to do other than restrooms that's required still to meet requirements of the Division of State Architect from past projects. Although we met the requirements of our lawsuit settlement, Division of State Architect still has additional requirements, and they're going to impose those if we go forward with the new wing or anything else on that campus. So with that, I'd be open for comments from board members on how we laid out the matrix, any questions or of why I did what, or any suggestions for changes.
Mrs. Deacon?
Well, I seem to recall I was involved in this initial idea, and I look at it now and I think, boy, this doesn't make it a whole lot easier. I mean, I appreciate all the work, but I'm looking at the fact that some of the principal requested items fall far below the top tier.
It's
So
called
it gives us-
flexibility.
I know, and it certainly, but it's helpful, and I appreciate it. And
Right.
it gives us a place to start. And I also, I spoke to you about this earlier. I initially was a little concerned I didn't see more X's in the green column, but I think the important point to make is a lot of the projects, like classroom modernization, are absolutely going to
Right.
improve energy efficiency. And so in many ways, almost all of these would have a green
Yeah.
check mark by them.
Correct. There's a lot of subjectivity to what we're attempting to do here. And you know, it's a very valid point. Every time we do a classroom modernization, we put in more efficient lighting, we replace a boiler that takes more energy. That is a green project. My initial placement of the X's were the photovoltaics that would possibly happen at our larger campuses. Would definitely be a green, kind of you hit the green and alleviate general fund at the same time, because those would. And in fact, all of our modernizations, the same way they'd be green, they would help alleviate the general fund because they would theoretically lower our utility bills. So there's a lot of places you can go through, depending on how subjective you want to be or where you want to draw the line. You could add more X's. But I think the good news is that most of the bolded items that were the principal's first priorities, those are at the top or near the top. But then again, it's like I said, from a facilities point of view, a priority may be different than an operational point of view from a principal, and you really have to balance those and listen to both sides. And it by no means that what that principal thinks isn't the most important thing for that campus may not be the most important thing.
Right. And I'll just close with saying at some point, cost is going to have to come into this.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we didn't know how to assign a point value to that.
Well, let me pick up on that if you don't mind. One of the things that concerns me and has for a long time is that there's a perception that this fund of money, we can start spending it. And as I understand it, in the elementary district, we have about $15 million that we might start getting in, 2011, and we won't get any more until 2015. So I think there needs to be a column or some type of criteria, what's the most important to spend our money on? Because if you just take two libraries, that's going to take an awful lot of the $15 million. Or if you just take the portables changing the portables at San Marcos and put new buildings in, that's going to take a lot of the $35 million that we might get in 2011. And so I think we have this perception out there that we've got 35 million and 75 million, but a lot of that is a long time off. And so are there things on this list that, hey, we have to spend now, or we really won't have an asset to protect 4 years from now?
Correct.
And so sometimes the protect asset, to me, takes maybe more of a weight than some of the other things, or the ADA or settlement takes more of a weight. It's not, every check mark is not equal. Yeah, so
Yeah,
we
I'd
have
like to
15
address
million
that.
to spend. How are we going to spend it? Dr. Sarvis or Mr. Cordero?
Go ahead.
That was gonna be my exact comment, that I felt like, the score, to me, was not helpful, I didn't quite know exactly what to do with that score, because there are some things that I think ADA settlement and code safety, and code and safety, DSA, are, some of those are just sort of have to do things. We don't have a lot of choice. And so they take priority whether or not they have the highest score. And so I appreciated having the X's in the columns, because that helped me see which items addressed which areas. But I would not like us to consider them based on the total score. I think we need to look at which items it is that they are fulfilling, and not just say if they have 3, it's better than if they have 2. And so I can understand why you put that there, and it was sort of helpful to have them in, the descending order to see which ones fulfilled more, but I don't want us to really use that as we prioritize the items.
And I would say that if you asked me for my recommendations or my department recommendations, it would not be to follow the list from 4 down to 0.
4 to 3, yeah.
Or 3 down to 0, depending on what is there. But it does help, like you say, it does help identify what does this project address, how many of the areas does it address, and then you can look at the money available and reprioritize, within that criteria.
In fact, the purpose of this report is to do just exactly that. It's to identify how many of those areas these projects do address. And we purposely did not want to bring a list of recommended priorities to you now before the election. We really think that we need to wait for the election, then we need to go into detailed conversations about what the priorities should be. And at that point, we will bring you a list of recommended priorities, and they won't be do the 4s first, do the 3s second.
Well, I hope that that's clear to any public who see this list, where
Well-
it says score, that doesn't
Yes.
really mean a priority level or a priority
We-
score.
Yes, we really only assigned the numbers because we understood that the board was asking for that.
Mrs. Parker?
Thank you. It makes me feel a little bit better, because it did, I think some of the projects, when I looked at them and where they got the X's and where they didn't, surprise me. But I could see adding a column for either site priority or instructional priority. Again, all that would do ultimately, I think that those are important things that we have to take into consideration, but then again, I want to be careful about how that slides over into where it goes in the priority list. But I've seen this before. I mean, I started coming to board meetings around the I-98. I've watched this for years, and it is frustrating, and it's really hard, and it's hard being on this side this time. And I can only hope that this is a big problem, because we won't know for sure until November 3rd. But I know that we will look at this very carefully as a board, and I know that you guys will scrutinize this in the as principals, as
And principals, while they had the project lists and they gave input, they've not had a chance yet to give input to any of this. The first time many of them will see this is when it was published, so, you know, if Q and R do pass, you know, there's a few steps that have to be taken from my department. Number one is get back in touch with the schools. That to me is a
I just
given.
want to make, we have it really clear that this money is coming in stages. And so
Oh, yes.
everything's not going to be done, or, you know,
That is one
and
of the
maybe some of these
important
things will
point.
be 10 years before it gets done. you know.
Correct.
So got to understand that aspect of this process and determine what needs to be done now.
Mr. Herron, since they're putting our caveats on the table, may I also once again caution the board that I do not believe that it would be appropriate to turn the prioritization over to an oversight committee. I believe that that's a board function. We need to come back to the board, have the discussions with the board, with the entire board, and make those decisions at the board level.
Okay.
I agree, and I just wanted to go back to one thing Mrs. Cordero mentioned, which was, I think when we first talked about this, we did talk about weighting some of these categories more heavily than others, and certainly the things that we have to do, like the ADA piece, before we can even move forward on any of the others, is going to come into play in the decision-making process.
I consider this a first-run draft.
Thank you for the effort. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we'll move to F.
Public comment.
Oh, okay. Mr. Wheeler.
Lane Wheeler?
Lane Wheeler, President of Santa Barbara Teachers Association. Concur with you that this, we may be getting slightly ahead of ourselves, but I will celebrate the activity that we have made so much progress on, and that's getting this conversation to this level. So that's something that I think we collectively, the board, should take some credit for and having the foresight to bring this forward. That being said, a couple of comments. Timeline is certainly one that we'd like to see happen on this. Making sure the timeline is very clearly identified and how the process is going to move forward, and also creating that priority list. Obviously, this is a first shot at this, and it's not set in stone. I had very large concerns when I heard Mr. Het-Jan describing this, and I heard principal, 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 and I did not hear teacher, because the teachers speak for the students. And if your classroom is sweltering hot, or your internet is not working, or your there's a trip and fall hazard that's there, those comments need to be heard. Constantly, we have teachers who aren't, we just heard in the last report from Santa Barbara High, the inability to use particular software programs because they don't have the internet connectivity, or it runs at the speed of a 1928 Ford Model T or A or whatever the model is. Some of those things may become priorities as we start looking at that instructional plan, as you mentioned, Ms. Parker. So I would definitely like to have teachers involved in at least a consideration. I'd like to know clearly what we see as the timeline and how those chunks of money would be filtering in and how we do that. And kind of kicking back to what you all had discussed at a prior board meeting, the idea of those repair projects that are the ones that you notice that you sort of skin your knee on and cause a lot of aggravation to you on, and how do we get those prioritized back into this? And certainly, please take time to at least evaluate the staff that's there, hear what they're having troubles with and what they're having issues with. We may find out that that's like a Venn diagram, that there's a central area where we really need to concentrate, and I would ask you to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I did forget one thing. Wireless internet got no marks all the way across for anybody, but yet we do have 3 schools that are now going wireless. So in the interest of parity, maybe the other schools should have it too. So maybe some X marks and parity for the other schools. And that saves a lot of money if we do it correctly. According to the report I saw, we save a lot of money because we're going to have to rewire the schools anyway, because our infrastructure is not that good in some of the schools, as I understand it. So, well, I've got Dr. Hayden shaking his head, and I got Mr. Hetyank in amazement. So will the two of you talk to each other? Okay. Thank you. Let's go now on to F6.
And Eric Smith, our Deputy Superintendent, will present this.
Thank you, Dr. Sarvis. On August 10th, the President signed into law H.R. 1586, commonly referred to as the Education Jobs Bill. The intent of this law is to be used for compensation and benefits and other expenses necessary to retain existing employees or to recall or rehire former employers or to hire new employees in order to provide early childhood, elementary, or secondary education and related services. This includes, among other things, salaries, performance bonuses, health insurance, retirement benefits, incentives for early retirement, pension fund contributions, union reimbursement, or tuition reimbursement, rather, student loan repayment assistance, transportation subsidies, and reimbursement for child care expenses. Now, time for me to take a breath there. The use of these funds is really permitted only on teachers, principals, assistant principals, academic coaches, in-service trainers, classroom aides, counselors, librarians, basically everything under the sun with the exception of district office staff and administration. So we've been notified by the California Department of Ed that we'll receive 90% of our entitlement here, which is roughly $800,000 in the elementary district and $2 million in the secondary district. And we need to start talking about the process of how we're going to use these one-time funds. We are in discussions with both SBTA and CSEA about what they'd like to see us use, but we've been very clear that the board was going to give us direction about what the board's priorities are, and that'd be a jumping off point for us. So at this point, we're just bringing the information to you, looking for feedback and some direction in terms of what might be some of the board's priorities to facilitate these discussions with our employee associations.
There is a new F6 with a date change in the second paragraph.
I probably should point out that these funds can only be used for expenses that were incurred after August 10th, 2010, when the bill was signed into law, and we can actually hold on to this funds all the way until September of 2012. So we have about a year and a half if we want to try and stretch things out, if we're thinking about positions or anything of that nature. But I think the intent of the law was to try and get the money on the street as soon as possible.
That's hard to do in the middle of this. Year's already started. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
Mrs. Parker.
Well, I do think it's important for us to keep in mind that we'll be really looking in November at the budget and how this fits into the overall picture there. It'd be foolish for us to do anything with one-time money that would then put us in a position where we're laying off people. And so I want to be sure that that's all in the mix. Having said that, I am very aware of the rising healthcare costs that our employees have faced in particular. I'm very aware that it's been a very tough 2 years. And I'm very aware that we have administrators on furlough days. And I wish that this had come earlier so that we could have put it in play in terms of staffing before the school year started. I want to be careful that what we're doing is best for students and not disruptive. But I can't tell you how grateful I am to be here having this discussion right now, and I'm looking forward to how this can mitigate the really dire educational fiscal environment that's been true in the state and in our district to whatever limited extent that it can. I appreciate that.
Mrs. Cordero.
Well, I would echo a lot of what Ms. Parker said, but I also just, I'm thrilled that these funds are available. I just think it's really important that we continue to sort of recommit to the notion that we don't spend one-time monies on ongoing, in ways that create ongoing costs.
You don't use it for things that eat.
Exactly, yeah. So.
That's not my line, that's a Ron Bennett line for School Services of California, but it conjures up a good visual there, you know, so.
So, I mean, I think we probably really do need to wait until the budget, until we're looking at our budget and until the state budget is clearly defined. But I think there are some things that we could do on a one-time basis with these one-time funds that could help to offset some of the things that we've had, some of the costs to some of our employees, or some of the impacts that Ms. Parker was mentioning. But we would have to keep it on a one-time basis, and that's just my biggest concern.
Boy, I've trained you guys well.
You have,
Yeah.
we've learned.
One thing about waiting till November, I'll just toss it out, is we do have a furlough day in November.
That's correct.
What do we need, if we wanted to, what would we need to do to figure out, number one, how much that costs us, and what would?
We have those calculations, but you have two issues. You've got furlough days with CSEA and with management. And if the board was gonna take some kind of action, let's say with regard to management, because we'd have to negotiate with CSEA, although we meet with them on Thursday. Remember, you'd also have to be willing to cop up the proportional share of the district office from the unrestricted general fund, because hence the federal ed jobs fund, although I think that's a very small percentage of the pie. But I'm sure Meg has those figures in terms of what the cost of the furlough days for administration was. I can't remember off the top of my head. 60,000? Yeah, that's what I think.
It's something to look at, because it is coming in November, and
Well, since that date is coming up, if you want to look at it, you really can't wait until November.
well, that's what my
and
point is.
We've already notified site principals, for example, well, all administrators, that they're going to take the Wednesday before Thanksgiving off. They're not going to get paid for it. They're going to have 2 fewer days in the year. That's one of the days. Another is over winter break. So we wouldn't want to wait until just 2 weeks before to make a decision about it. We'd better bring that back this next meeting.
Yeah, just what the cost is, and is that a proper use of this fund, and how much of these funds would that take? So
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna take a large portion. I know another thing, I'm just gonna start giving you a stream of consciousness in terms of things that I'd heard, you know, and obviously I'm not gonna talk about anything we talked about in negotiations, but, you know, I can tell you the athletic trainers came forward and said, well, do you think the board would be willing to restore, or the ADs came forward and said, do you think the board would be willing to restore the hours on the athletic trainers? I said, I don't know, you know, I mean, I can ask, I mean, but that's one of those things you could stretch out over 18 months rather than just 1 year. I know the board's also indicated a desire to maybe beef up maintenance. You know, we probably wouldn't want to do that through our traditional routine restricted maintenance, but we have a job classification called multi-craft that we could bring somebody on board for 18 months since we can hang on to this money through September of 12. It's, you know, it'd have to be a limited term position and we would fly it, you know, or if we had a couple of positions, but those are some of the things that, you know, I've been hearing from various sources. Obviously, some of the things that you've mentioned are things that we've heard from other parties as well that I think there's a keen interest in. And, but we could probably come back on the 28th, which will be bringing you a report on the state budget at that time, probably the 45-day revise, since we go to a conference tomorrow at the county office about it. And along with that, or in a separate item, we could bring some of these things we could quantify in terms of what the cost would be.
thank you. Mr. Deacon?
I guess just one of my final comments would, on this is this was for jobs. I mean, that's what this money was for. So even though people eat, I mean, that's really what this was all about. And I think to be true to the spirit of what the money was intended for, you know, even if we can extend those positions longer, and maybe the economy will get better later, but I mean, I would love to see us bring back, you know, some people that we had to let go, look at the furlough piece, maybe do something that all our current employees benefit from. So You know, I still want that security officer at Santa Barbara High. I mean, those are
Yes,
the
well,
kinds of things,
that's-
you know, that jumped out at me right away. So that would be the kind of guidance that I would like to look for. Is there any way, if it's too late for the November furlough day for site administrators, is there any way to pay them for a day at the end of the school year?
Well, there certainly is,
Mhm.
yes.
Okay,
Okay.
so that's just another thought.
Mrs. Parker?
Yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to bring up, is it seems like, and probably for almost all of our employees, that there's probably a way to address it later in the year rather than having to do it before November, especially because people may have made plans at this point. But I also wanted just to touch on what Mrs. Deacon was raising. It's about jobs. It's about stimulus. It's about getting money back into the economy. So anything that we can do for our employees so that they have more money to spend in our local community, that will make a difference in our community and our state. So I hope we can move forward with something quickly.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Smith. We have no consent items to go back to. Coming events, I think Dr. Sarver's covered those. I thought of one, but I don't know what it was. Okay. Future agenda items. We have a long list. At some point, two things I'd like, at least I'd like, and if nobody else does, just tell me. There is a problem with technology in Read 180. Tonight we approved the purchase of a new server. And I've been told in some schools, Read 180 has been a disaster so far this year. And what I'd like to know is exactly what is the extent of the problem, what's being done to compensate for it, rather than sit until the end of the year and we find out a report that, well, it didn't work this year because we were delayed at the beginning of the year. So if there's things that can be done or are being done to compensate for the fact that it wasn't working correctly, I'd like sort of summary of what the problem was, how it was solved. Is the new server up and running, and is it working? Just those kinds of things. I'd like some type of report on that. And I guess in light of the discussion with Mr. Caprito, and I guess I would like to see a job description for a director of secondary education. Not that I want to hire one, but I'd like to see a job description and a salary structure where it would fit on the plan, just to have it in case the board wants to take that direction at some time. Mrs. Deacon?
I have one quick thing, and this was also prompted by the truancy discussion earlier. The new district attorney promised that there would be perhaps some bringing back of their involvement in the truancy program. I think enough time has passed that it's time to go back and ask them about that.
Okay, Mrs. Parker?
And I would just follow up with the discussion on, with Santa Barbara High, and that sometime soon, I think we need to be looking as a board at our English language arts high school curriculum.
Okay. Anything further? Thank you all. I will adjourn the meeting. And at least we didn't stay till 10:30.